And good morning, especially. Hello. Hi. Hi, good evening from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, especially from the Asia Pacific University. And good morning to our participants who are from the other side of the world. And it is a pleasure for us today to be hosting our next Let's ID Talk Series 3. And we welcome all of you on board again from the Asia Pacific University. And my name is Aptar. I am a professor of digital learning at the Asia Pacific University. And I'm also leading the Digital Learning Hub, where we support online and digital learning for our academics at the Asia Pacific University. Today, we have a very special speaker with us, and we would like to introduce to you our speaker, that is Professor Dr. Robert Branch. He is a professor of learning design and technology at the University of Georgia. Professor Branch, I have known him since my days at Syracuse University, as we used to hear his name in the background. I was doing my master's, and our professors used to talk about him. Professor Branch got his doctorate of education at Syracuse University, so we are both alumni from the same university. He has vast experience in education, spanning decades, and especially in instructional design. I've heard him speak, and I've read a lot of his articles, which got me interested in his work. As you can see, Prof. Branch has published over 86 papers in high-reference journals, okay, authored 4 books and edited 9 books. I think his publication and research is so vast, and a lot of students have read and quoted his work where ID is concerned. And he has also served on numerous doctoral dissertation committees. That's when I first made contact with Prof. Branch. He was on our doctoral committee at Hamdan University in Dubai. It was a real pleasure to meet him in person in Dubai 2 years ago. And we realized we had a lot in common, okay? Prof. Branch emphasizes student-centered learning. So this is also the soul and heartbeat of the Asia Pacific University, student-centered learning, and I'm sure for many academic institutions as well. Okay, so I believe his talk today will take us to this aspect of student-centered learning. Okay, and his talk today is on instructional design models for digital learning spaces. Prof. Branch, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those kind words, and thank you to the team for having me. I consider this a privilege, and of course, you and I are like colleagues. We're just at different universities right now. As Prof. Aptar said, I really enjoy what I do, but more importantly, when I get a chance to work with colleagues, that's good. Let me get right to this, the session today, because I just want to spend a few minutes with you talking about instructional design, but specifically for the future. And, you know, I believe in truth in advertising, to be sure. So the image you saw, certainly it's still me. It's just that a couple of touch-ups for this session I thought were appropriate. I thought I'd share, you heard about me, that's good. I wanted to share just a little bit more so that you can get an orientation of me as the speaker. While we're doing the session, there will be opportunities for us to have some questions and some answers at the end, but also if you have questions during the presentation, I invite you to share those questions in the chat as instructed. Let me get right to it. When I think about, well, I want to spend a few minutes with you talking about why we need instructional design, a review, if you will, of instructional design for most of you, because I understand you're quite familiar with instructional design, but I want to set it up so that we get to a taxonomy where you can ask yourself, what is the most appropriate instructional design model that I can use when I'm preparing my teaching and learning materials, especially for digital learning environments? I mean, think about our model, the current modern digital learning environments. Look at how they've been influenced by the internet, microcomputing technologies. One of my favorites, real-time data. The days of developing instruction with chalk and talk are over. Students now can go to data sources while they are actually learning. And don't get me started about social networking. Look at what social networking has done to influence what happens in the so-called classroom. I mean, practically any student, every student has got a cell phone and most a smartphone. So while you are teaching or developing instruction, those students are going online and fact checking. So when I think about instructional design and its future, while there are many models, the models of instructional design in the future must be capable of accommodating these virtual and digital learning environments. And further, they've got to be able to address some of the prevailing teaching and learning strategies. So bear with me. I'd like to take about 30 minutes or so. And I'm going to move probably fast, but the moderators will slow me down if I go too fast. But I'd like to really take a few minutes and introduce some ideas to you. Some of these ideas you will agree with, I hope. Others you might challenge. But I want to talk about this notion of learning space. So when we talk about digital learning environments, I'm going to talk about a concept called learning space. Then we'll get to instructional design, after which we'll identify some factors to consider. And interestingly enough, I'll finish the presentation with the taxonomy, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what might be missing from that taxonomy. But a couple of assumptions. Take a look at this. And I mention this because the word instruction has taken on several connotations, some of which are less than positive. So for this session, particularly because we're talking about instructional design, I would like for us to understand and interpret instructional design or instruction as both teaching and learning. So the first opportunity for you to decide if you agree or disagree with some of the things I'm saying is now. Take a look at how I interpret teaching and how I suggest to you learning. So, based on that assumption, I'd like to go forward. Hang on, learning space. This is not instructional design yet. I'll get to instructional design. This is about this concept called learning space, where you've got several things happening, interacting within a discrete period of time while seeking the same outcome. Think about it. I'm sure that the majority of us, if not all of us, on this call are dealing with student, content, media, teacher, peers, context, all of these things. And guess what? Each of these is interacting with each of the others. Whoa. This is the environment that we're planning for? whether it's face-to-face, digital, or otherwise. Look at all of the interactions that we've got to cater to. I would prefer to look at it one piece at a time because I need to deconstruct this complexity. So I'm going to start with the student. I'm going to introduce this idea, and I'm going to even pause to see if there are some challenges or confirmations. But this business is complex because at the very least, the student is complex. What knowledge and skills are the students bringing? What do they already know about the content? What does the student expect to accomplish? What do you expect the student to accomplish at the end of any kind of course or unit or training? So the student entity is complex. The content, which is actually a knowledge structure, and you could look at the literature and see what it says about constructing knowledge and the knowledge structure. But the content, for most of us, is the heart of what we do. That's our discipline. That's what we've studied, and we've strived to develop some degree of expertise. But content comes in different types. There are different skills, different knowledge, different pedagogies, andragogies for adult learners for sure, that are associated with the content knowledge. And therefore, the content is complex. So already I can say to you, we've got 3 complex entities. Oh, let me pause. Some of you are saying, I only see 2. Did they really? Where does he see this third one? Because we all know that 1 + 1 = 3. Okay. It's right about this point that some of you are saying, did they really invite this guy who thinks 1 + 1 = 3? Absolutely. When you think about the complexity associated with learning spaces, the spaces that we have to deal with, that's right, there's that third entity. You've got the student, you've got the content, and as we know, the interaction effect. That's the third entity. That interaction just between the student and the content increases the complexity of the learning space for which we are dealing with. Let me move on, because almost always there's more than one person that we deal with. Even with one-to-one instruction, we have to develop learning in such a way that multiple people can benefit from it. So we have to ask ourselves, especially in these future classrooms, how many students are in this community of learners? What are the knowledge assets that are available to these learners? And what are the skill assets available to these learners? And then again, they interact. So you've got different students interacting with other students and the content, and all of this is mediated. Notice I avoided the term technology, because to mediate is to do something else. We've got, and this is just the beginning. What tools are needed to teach? What tools are needed to learn? And what tools do we need to apply the skills and knowledge? Because if teaching is only the instructor telling the students, it's poor teaching. Telling is not teaching. Listening is not learning. Students learn by doing. Sometimes at this point, people say, wow, okay, now we finally talk about the teacher. No, the teacher is an extremely important role. Teacher, instructor, professor. But the role in most learning spaces, and indeed in digital learning environments, the teacher is more of a facilitator. Yes, the teacher, he or she, has to have a certain degree of expertise, must be knowledgeable about the topic. And sometimes the teacher also needs to be the learner. But the teacher has a very, very important role, in my humble opinion. And that role is to really establish a relationship with the student. Now, again, I'll get to instructional design, but what I'm trying to suggest is that this is a very complex environment, and that you need to be aware, I think we need to be aware of our own teaching philosophy. For example, in the learning spaces I deal with, I contend that this ought to be the philosophy of my learning space. Please take a look. What might you understand from this rather simple diagram? What's your philosophy? Do the teachers you work with, do they subscribe to this? At any rate, here's a different way to look at learning space. But please keep in mind that all of these things are bound by goals. What are the expectations after they leave your classroom? What do instructors and teachers need to see within the classroom? And take a look at number 3. This is extremely important. What is the relationship between what you do in your classroom or the learning space and what the students will be expected to do after they leave your classroom? I'll call it the performance space. Let me give you a better look at that. When you think about the time that you've got, is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? How much time do we have? How much time should be allowed? When you think about the context, because everything is situated somewhere, what type of environment, what kind of administrative support? Do you have an infrastructure that can support digital learning spaces? And how long does this instruction need to last? So imagine each of these things pulsating and they're connected, and during time, the distance between the two is changing and elements evolve over time. The student that begins your course may not be the same student that ends your course. Even this space here generates its own ecology. Imagine the beginning of a course or the beginning of a unit. You've got all these things interacting and rotating. And at times, other things may be at the center, but it has its own ecology. This is what we have to deal with. This is the complexity. There's a different way that we can view it. And this is based on what we know from research. Ball and Ferranzi have long talked about the way teachers and learners and content in the environment are all having dynamic relationships. That was the situation. They described the problem. Here's the solution. You need to examine those didactic relationships. You need to examine, before you even start thinking about instructional design, before you start thinking about instructional design models, in our environments, especially our digital environments, what are just some of the dyadic relationships? Let me leave this here for a second. Take a look. Pick any 2 relationships. Again, my favorite is the teacher and the student. But pick any other relationship and think about it. Look at the complexity about the way a student might use certain media, the way content might be perceived by one student, yet different from another. Think about the time that you allow. What are the outcomes? Let me pause just for a second. Let's see where we are. Pick a dyadic relationship. 2, any 2. In fact, I would invite you to put in the chat one of the relationships, just any one relationship that you think is really important in virtual learning spaces, or any space for that matter. Because, by the way, this paradigm, it's not a model, it's not telling you to do anything, it's not normative, it's just saying, here's a way to describe the entities that are involved in the complexity of learning. If you got any questions, feel free to put them in the text. We'll get to them. But right now, in the chat, in the text box rather, how about you Think about it. Media and pedagogy. Yeah. The teacher-centered. Oh boy, we're going to have fun later on. Teacher-centered while preparing, but even while preparing, we may want to consider the student. So now we're ready to talk about instructional design. All this is intended to say is that this is the environment in which we live. So how can we begin to address the complexities associated with learning space? Ta-da! Instructional design. We're talking about a systematic process. We're talking about a process that's student-centered, responsive, generative, collaborative. It even should be inspirational. But let's just take a look at a couple. So we hear student-centered. What do we mean by something that's student-centered? We mean that the student is the focal point of everything we do. Again, let me pause. Some of you may have a different perspective. Even as number 3 suggests, students ought to have an opportunity to participate in their own learning. Wait, let me rephrase that. Students must actively participate in their own learning by the different study strategies, learning strategies, identifying the outcomes. Instructional design is responsive because it's only after your goals and outcomes are established do you need instructional design. If you do not have any educational goals, do not use instructional design. Do not pass go, do not collect $200 for you Monopoly players. The goals should reflect the expectations of the student and the teacher, but get this, there's a third expectation. I'm going to call this the client. The client could be maybe the instructor who's going to be teaching the students next. Maybe the client's going to be the employer who's going to hire the graduates. The client can come in many forms. The client could be maybe someone in the community who's going to utilize the value brought by those students. It's generative. Good instructional design is generative. It's not trivial. It's not simplified. It addresses the complexity and it focuses on authentic tasks. Now I'm talking about instructional design because we're talking about a high fidelity process. Oh, let me slow down again. Check this out. Instructional design promotes a high congruence between the learning environment and the performance environment. Hang on to your hat because you see the red box there? That's the learning space. And you see it's blue on my screen. I'm not sure what's coming through on yours, but the larger box is the actual performance space in which your students will be expected to perform after they leave your classroom. And unfortunately, a lot of us end up here. It might be okay to start here, but good instructional design models will help the teacher work with the student so that the learning space that the students move through as they move through your class or your unit or your topic or course, that the learning space approximates the performance space when all is said and done. Unfortunately, you know what? Some of us, well, maybe no one on this particular session, but some people I've seen, they're stuck here. And when they finish teaching, they go out to places to work or another class and have to be trained all over again. That's because the instruction was poor. It's okay to start here. It's okay to move through these. But when you finish, whatever design you use ought to make it so that when you finish, your students will be able to just step right into the reality of performance space and perform using the knowledge that they constructed or co-constructed with you. Here's a challenge. If what you do in your classroom cannot be used after your students leave your classroom, then what you did in your classroom is probably worthless. There, I said it. Uh-oh. Let's see if the chat room blows up now. Okay. Oh, let me finish this presentation. I want to get to some of these questions and answers. So all I'm saying here is that it's a high fidelity process. Instructional design is a collaborative process, especially because of the size and scope. In fact, especially in digital learning environments, if you've got one class with a small number of students and you're going to teach the same thing over and over, and you know the students, you've had them several times, you don't need instructional design. Just get a good lesson planning model. Maybe take some bits and pieces of the instructional design process. But if you're going to prepare some materials that need a longer shelf life, where knowledge and skills need to be specialized, diverse, inclusive, equitable, some would even say liberating, then yeah, you might use instructional design because it is a team and collaborative process for the most part. It's also practical. It's practical because you invoke project management tools, and now you begin to look at specific models. Remember, instructional design is known as ISD, instructional development. Most of it has its roots in the systems approach. And there have been a plethora of models over the last 50 years, and now there's even more variety. The overwhelming majority, though, models are based on the input process output. One of the most popular and one of the best models and earlier ones was the Dick and Carey. I know they revised it in 2008, but back in 1980 something, they came out with this one. Notice the rectilinear approach. Part of the problem became that instructional design models seemed very lockstep. They were not lockstep. In fact, they were really more iterative than they were presented. But instructional design allows an opportunity for us to generate models. And I share this graphic because it's an attempt to futurize the instructional design model. Imagine that bottom layer. That's just the evaluation. You're evaluating from the very beginning. Maybe the top one, that's your analysis. And imagine that this can morph and shift and move and change shape and size depending on the context, depending on the environment. Yes, many of us are familiar with the ADDIE approach, but remember, ADDIE's not instructional design, it's a product development concept. And if we understand that developing teaching and learning materials are products, then what's a good product development process that can address the complexities of learning space? ADDIE's just one way. In fact, I suggest to you, ADDIE's not even a model, but it's a paradigm where it's got several purposes: identifying the causes for a performance gap, verifying the specific performances, generating materials, preparing the environment, making assessments. Most of us know about the 5 phases, but again, while there are several things happen and many things are iterative, please keep in mind there's a line of sight. The analysis needs to feed into the design, and you need to really go through each of these. Take another look at this, because we as instructional designers, and you who practice this, who are watching this, please be aware that you need to maintain an alignment of the original needs, the purpose, the goals, the outcomes, the strategies, the assessment. They all need to align. Let me show this very quickly, just as an example. This is at the micro level now. And imagine you're generating your teaching and learning materials. You've generated several tasks, and now you have to create an objective. And for each objective, you need a test item, or at least a test item for the objectives. Let me make sure you understand. Look at the task. The task is generate a floor plan. I don't know what, this is probably some class on building construction or some kind of class that students might take where they have to actually physically make something. But that's the task. Look at the objective. It's got 3 components, but look how it starts. The objective says the student, at the end of this session, the student will be able to generate a floor plan for a licensed construction supervisor that satisfies all building codes and regulations. That's an authentic task. That's not a classroom exercise. That's something that the students, that's a knowledge, that's a type of skill that the students will need after they leave your classroom. Does your instructional design approach create learning outcomes that students can practice while they're in your class, but they can use when they leave your class? Take a look at the line of sight. It's bona fide by the test item. Here's the test item. Here's what the students actually get tested on. Using a computer-aided design tool, generate a floor plan for the entry level of a new domestic dwelling of approximately 970 square meters that is ready to submit to the Building Code Enforcement Office. I pause. I gotta take a look. Just taking a look at some of the comments. Challenges? I got to respond to one, depending on the age. Absolutely. That's why good instructional design models, as part of the analysis, will definitely identify the learner characteristics. Let me kind of wrap up this section. All I'm saying is you got to make sure you keep a line of sight. If you see yourself wavering, you're out of line. So when we think about the fundamentals of instructional design, good instructional design, that's right, I said good, student-centered, responsive, generative, complex, collaborative, high fidelity, and practical. But now, what are some future factors that we need to consider? Now we're getting down to where I need your input. So I'm going to get close to wrapping this up. I'm probably saying things that we all know, but they need to be brought to our attention because they need to be specifically added to the way we design and develop instruction. These are just a few. I am sure that you can add some. In fact, take a look at this list and what would be number 11 for you in terms of future factors? Future factors now. We got artificial intelligence, remote learning. Again, the availability of real-time data. No longer can you get away with stale lesson plans that you've been using for the last 5 years because students are more astute than that. Games, gamification, virtual reality, augmented reality. The Educational Media and Technology Yearbook, volume 42, has a whole section on virtual reality and augmented reality. What's your number 11? What are some futuristic aspects that would influence learning spaces that you think need to be included in an instructional design model? Go ahead and put it in the text box. Absolutely needs assessment. Yeah. Other comments? Okay. Well, you can keep putting them in. What I'm trying to say here is that different kinds of learning, such as a case-based approach, the whole notion of action learning, the opportunity to provide guided practice. It says inside class, it's during the class. And then even homework. We need to change how we think about homework. we've got the flipped classroom. Here, kudos to you instructional designers. I submit, we as instructional designers, we have been so-called flipping the classroom for years. I'm glad that now the masses have discovered it. But we have been very well aware that we need students to do a lot of the work outside. And when we come back into the classroom, that's when we do the sharing. And the classroom has changed. It's still a common forum to get together, but now we're talking about situated classrooms in digital spaces where we're not in columns and rows anymore. The teacher is not standing up, well, I hope the teacher is not standing up in front of the class pontificating. Yeah. There is room for lecture, but in the instructional design models that you use, I ask you, please use models that fit the environment. And our environment right now is a fast-paced environment where we really have to account for a variety of factors. And that leads us to the taxonomy, which was the purpose of all this, is to share with you a taxonomy, actually get your input. In fact, let me get my pen because I will need to take some notes. But there have been people who've looked at different models of instructional design over the years. I'm proud to say that I've been part of looking at those models. And this, by the way, this version, this book is the latest one, and it's available at no cost if you're an ACT member. But if you're not, I think they still will let you get it because they're waiting for a 6th edition. But I mention this because here is the taxonomy that was presented in that version. It's now 10 years old? But take a look at what was the attempt. The attempt was to say, select an instructional design model based on the delivery format and some specific or selected characteristics. So first, was it online? This is the old one. I should have put the date here, whatever that date that is. But this is the old one. And whatever the delivery format, 2015. Is it face-to-face, flexible? And then look at the 7 factors. Was there an opportunity for analysis? And then a scale, a lot, a little, and there would be models characterized. Well, now I'm suggesting that we as instructional design professors or professionals go the other way. And that is, take a look at what the factors are. And ask ourselves, does the model, or is this model have the ability to account for case-based learning, problem-based learning, project-based learning? By the way, problem-based learning and project-based learning, they're different. Even experiential learning. You probably could add to this list, but think about the emerging learning theories. I mean, the whole notion of constructivism talks about these kinds of things. Does the model that you use of instructional design, is it a bit able to accommodate new learning theories? Learning spaces. Does the instructional design model you use, or the one that you might create, does it have the ability to address the complexities of learning space? And again, you might add elements 10, 11, and 12. Is the instructional design model that you use, does it allow you to be student-centered, responsive? Look at number 5. Does the model, is it parochial, or is it a model that can be ported across the globe? Digital learning spaces have no respective of time these days. I teach a course where I've got students on 3 different continents. Does my instructional design model give me an opportunity to plan in some way? And number 6 is one of my favorites. And I'm not sure how you get that out of an instructional design model, but does it give you an opportunity to generate inspirational learning activities. Another factor, how is it situated? Good instructional design promotes authentic learning, experiential learning. It's active, it's multifunctional. You can deal with ill-structured problems. One of the criticisms that people leveled against instructional design is that, oh, it's good for very simple things. Au contraire, a good instructional design model using through analysis, maybe a SWOT analysis, can identify the gaps even in ill-structured situations. So I encourage you, I ask you, you instructional design professionals, what are some ways you can deal with ill-structured situations? But either way, hopefully your model can generate practical and contextual kinds of situations. And then what's the reality? Some instructional design models are very good at handling same physical spaces, stand-up instructor-led training. Yeah, that's good. But what about those digital learning environments that are asynchronous, where students can meet anywhere, anytime, especially in remote locations? What about an augmented reality? Think about it now. These days, they tell you, hold your smartphone up to a QR code and you're looking at something. And of course, real-time data. Let me finish up by saying, you've got another factor. Does your instructional design model allow you opportunities to do an analysis? And I wouldn't list all the elements, because just think about the ADDIE approach and all of the things that are there. What about the scope of design? Is it big? Is it large? Does it need to have a large shelf life? What about the depth of development? One of my favorite models of instructional design is Wedman and Tesmer's layers of necessity, where depending on the situation will determine how far you go in each area of design. What skills are needed to even implement an instructional design process? What skills are needed to implement the development, the teaching and learning materials? And then what about evaluation and assessment? Do you have opportunities to improve and to revisit? All of these are in the next taxonomy. And I'm glad to say even you are helping me by looking at the next proposed taxonomy. I've taken those factors and added the elements, and I'll probably add a scale as a third column, but those are the new taxonomies. I apologize if I rush too fast, but I absolutely want to pause and say, that's my pitch. You got learning space, and because of learning space being complex, we need something that can deal with the complexities. Enter instructional design. Why? Instructional design is sufficiently complex to deal with the complexities of learning spaces, especially digital learning environments. But if we take into account future factors, then now we need to think a little differently about the robustness of our instructional design models, and thus maybe a new taxonomy. And that's what this is about. What say ye? What are your thoughts? At this point, let's open it up for questions, answers, suggestions. And while you're doing that, it gives me a chance to take a look at some information in the comments. Yes, real data-driven learning. Yes. The human brain capacity. We are, excuse me, brain-based learning. I forgot what they're calling it now. Maybe someone could put a comment in. But indeed, when we think about the brain and what I'm understanding about what we know about the hippocampus, we need to be cognizant of how we learn. There used to be information processing, before that behaviorism. You educational psychologists, you know about the different types of learning. We've got to take that into consideration. So, how will we stay relevant? And that's $1,000 question. Without sounding obvious, we've got to continue to read. And one of the areas lacking in instructional design is actually instructional design research. We need to read, we need to do more than just practice it. We need to collect data about, is it effective? We need longitudinal data, but we can remain active, believe it or not, through forums like these. We can remain current through forums like these, and we can find ways to share more. Yeah, we've got to find ways to share more. Let me think some more about that, because I want to state more than just the obvious. How do you remain current? How do you remain active? Let me think about that. And by the way, if some of you have better answers or an answer to some of the questions in the comment section, please go ahead and put them there.
So it looks like Rob is already looking at the comments and the questions. So let's proceed, Rob. We'll just attend to some of the questions, and then later we can have a more in-depth discussion of the reasons of why these questions are coming up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's one now by Ahmad Awad.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think could be the future of VR being embedded with online learning?
Yeah. And again, let me give an initial answer and invite others to join in. My immediate reaction is that it's another way to display information or display the results of knowledge that has been constructed. What I mean by that is, when we think about the instructional materials, the teaching learning materials, how do you display them? I just used PowerPoint. Yeah, that's fine. I could have used the video. I could have also created a virtual reality. I could have created an augmented reality. So I think it's another medium that can be used when we think about how that learning space, when we think about that learning space, I would say it really becomes this. And it's part of that. I'm not sure if you get what I'm saying, but that's my start.
I think that slide was a bit too brief. Could we have it up again?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess, and forgive me, I'm just figuring out manipulating this. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that the media, when I think about virtual reality or augmented reality, it becomes a way to interact with or a way to present content or share content. It becomes a way for the teacher to maybe facilitate different kinds of knowledge or just content, just different kinds of information. Is that okay? Forgive me.
That came up well.
Okay, and it went off now, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure I answered the question though.
I wonder, Rob, if the immersiveness of the environment in virtual, when you use virtual or mixed reality or augmented reality, complicates the learning space in any way. I'm just thinking. I'm also just thinking together with you. So would that then affect the way the instructional design process is defined? I suppose that might be something you could add on, because your model of that spaces is so interesting. I mean, the interactions between all the elements in the learning spaces, is really something to think about deeply. So to add another dimension of a different type of a media, will that include then to go deeper into the ID process? I'm not sure. I'm just thinking aloud.
No, I think you're onto something. And please, y'all, bear with me. Am I back to sharing the screen yet? No. Okay.
No, your screen did not come now.
So again, I want to go back to that. Let me go back to this one, this image, because one of the reasons why I shared this is to suggest that at different times while you're preparing your materials, different elements of this will rotate to the center and become the focal point. And indeed, even some of while you're teaching, there'll be an emphasis more on one area than the other. And that's what I meant by the embodiment of these things are pulsating, even the distance between, imagine an elastic band. So what I'm trying to suggest here as a way to answer the question or address this is that if I think about immersive technologies, then I'm looking at how I'm mediating these relationships. So instead of a chalkboard, I'm going to use an augmented reality. It's not the oh boy, Clark and Mere Media Vehicles Research. Remember, some people think the medium is the message. What I'm suggesting is, what is it that you want the medium to do for the student, for the teacher, for the content? Some content. One of the neat things about our immersive technology, especially in distance environments, is that it allows us an opportunity to get closer to the reality. So in a classroom, I'm in a classroom, I got 50 kids in the classroom, I'm the teacher, I got a chalk and a chalkboard, and I'm talking about Mount Vesuvius. So I draw on the chalkboard, I maybe bring in a big picture. But wait a second, I'm fortunate enough to be in another classroom with new media where I have an immersive technology and I have them put on some goggles, and guess what? They're at the base of Mount Vesuvius and they're looking at it. The content, the outcome remains the same. The students will be able to measure the size and scope of this volcano. But instead of me trying to draw something on the chalkboard, I'm fortunate enough to have that technology. Oh, maybe that's a stretch. Let me go back to my building one, the floor plan. Remember the floor plan? So maybe I'm just drawing on pencil and paper, or maybe I'm using computer-aided design, or maybe I have a QR code that the student scans in that now takes them to some 3D environment. Again, the content remain the same, the objective remain the same, but the tools I use to get there changed. Is that, I don't know, other comments, other thoughts?
Yeah. Let's see.
Oh, and by the way, there was a question about the young learners and online. Let me share with you a real quick story. So online learning. Yeah. You know what? I don't know if you've noticed. I think I even by design did not have the word online learning, because all of a sudden instructional design is good because of online learning. Remember, instructional design has been around for 80 years. And you know what? After online learning, there'll be some other digital environment. We just don't know what it is yet. And guess what? This space will still be relevant and instructional design will still be relevant because we're just addressing these. So if you're dealing with young learners, good. When you talk about the student and you focus on the student part, then make sure you identify the characteristics of young learners and match the pace at which you generate content. And remember, even young learners can be taught to learn how to learn. If you're asking a preschooler to learn how to tie her shoes and you tie them for her the first time, wonderful. But a good instructional design model says, hey, what are you doing to help that learner, whatever age, remember how to do it again? So I asked the preschooler, hey, how are you going to remember to tie your shoes? And pause. Just that psychological, just that cognition gets them to think about it. even one more thing about this online bit. And I'll go quickly because I know we're almost out of time and I want to hear one or two more questions. But one of the things in working with other faculty as an instructional designer, and I share with them these things, the first thing I ask them is, what do you want your students to accomplish? And I worked with an engineering faculty member, and this faculty member said, you know, they've got to be able to calculate the strengths and tensile strengths and all this good stuff for constructing a structure. And I said, fine. And we started going through some things because he had to put this course online. Well, after I finished working with this person and we were clear about what the outcomes were and that you could use different tools, his remark was, boy, I'm glad you're helping me with this online learning course. I'm going to use some of these strategies in my face-to-face course. Go figure. Excuse me. Let me slow down. Aptar, please, what questions do you think I should answer in the remaining?
I think, Rob, there is a comment before we go back to the earlier one that was put onto the screen. I think let's reflect a little bit on what Xiaoyan has said. She said, I'm trying to reflect on how different my children's learning today is from 30 years ago when I was in elementary school. The media is perhaps different, but the rest remains similar. Isn't that interesting?
Very.
And
that's extremely valid, because our children, while they still need to learn that 1 + 1 = 2 and not 3, while they still need to learn mathematics, let me back up. I even heard someone say, we don't even need to teach memorization. We don't need to teach the periodic table. We don't need to teach multiplication tables. We don't need to teach a lot of those things because it's at our fingertips now. Different conversation, different discussion, maybe a different debate. I really look forward to that debate, because one vision of the classroom of the future is that there is no classroom. I'm not sure what the answer is. And, you know, I got to tell you, Choyong, I got to tell you, I would try to ask the children, tell me how they learn, and have a conversation with them. And I'll tell you one piece of evidence that really makes sure or can verify that there's a difference. Our children, when they come home from school, especially if they've been in a new media classroom, they're not going to tolerate lecture. They're not going to tolerate boringness. They don't have to necessarily be entertained, as some people say. But I got to tell you, if you start spewing out information, they will put their head down, look at their digital device, and quickly come back and say, yeah, but yesterday they evacuated 3,000 more people from Afghanistan. Someone made a comment. After, allow me to make one comment, and I won't keep it.
Yeah, please.
But look, but this one, someone said it, and I really resonated with it, about the facilitator. Yes, Easy Corpus founder. My philosophy, thank you, my philosophy is exactly in line with this. It is the ultimate facilitator. It doesn't absolve you of your responsibilities as a teacher. In fact, it might invite you to have to do more, because now you have to stay on top of the new technologies. You've got to be aware of the different ways we communicate. But remember, good pedagogy is good pedagogy in whatever learning space says me. Interaction, immediate feedback, action, experiences, those are the things that we need to focus on. How you do that? You're limited only by your creativity and the tools that you have at your disposal. Thanks for listening to me. I hope I didn't speak too fast or say too many things, but please, anything you heard, I welcome any comments that say, yes, you're right, but I also welcome comments that say, I don't know about that one. So-and-so said this, which is contrary to what you said. That's how we grow, and that's how our students benefit.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was certainly very, very interesting and eye-opener for me myself, who's been in instructional design for so long. I really love the idea of these spaces, and I think more and more we need to really focus into digital, because with digital and with remote and with hybrid and whatever else that's coming, I think the the notion of the spaces, we need to keep in our mind the notion of that space and the rich interaction between the different elements. So I got that one, and I feel that that is very important. And I hope our listeners got that as well. And that we will continue this fora, Rob, because some of the participants are asking for your contact and as well as your PowerPoint slides, your slides. So will it be possible for our participants to connect back to you in any way?
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, of course. In fact, for some reason, I'm trying to figure out how to put my email address in the comment section, but please feel free to distribute that. And
yes.
And both the slides, I think you can see on the screen, that's my attempt at summarizing.
Yes. Okay. So with this, we really thank firstly our participants who have been very active. And we do keep getting some participants who have been with us for the 3 series. And I'm very glad. And I'm very happy that you are all on board with us. And then I would like to now also give a big hand to Rob for such an interactive and interesting session on ID models and the digital learning spaces. So with that,
Yes.
Tim, do you agree with pedagogy first? Yes,
Yes.
okay.
And that's a good ending. Yes.
Yes, that's a good ending, Pak Tim. Thank you all again, and we will meet again in our next series. And we are hoping that you all will come on board into this interesting instructional design discussion. It's been there forever, as Rob say, but keeps on changing according to the learning environments. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much for having me, Apta. This has been a treat.
Yeah, we are very happy, and we are very fortunate to have you give us your time, Rob. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, with that, I will end this session, and we'll pick it up again. And when you have some questions to pose to us, we will pick it up with Rob. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Gary, Jonathan, thank you.
Yes, all the best from the Asia Pacific University.